Hello and welcome to the Crypto Masters podcast, helping the general public to master an understanding of crypto assets. My name is Brian McCoy.
And my name is Ross Eaton.
And we are the Crypto Masters. We're going to get started. Our goal is to provide information about crypto assets to help the public make investment decisions in the crypto space. We don't try to predict short-term price movements, so this show is not for short-term traders.
We're trying to provide information about different crypto assets to allow, you, the listener, to make your own investment decisions. We're not giving any financial advice here.
And our plan going forward in the podcast is to discuss one or two or who knows, maybe more, but mainly focus on one or two crypto assets, which are, some of the altcoins, and we will just address a different one on different shows. But first, I think let's give our listeners a brief summary of our backgrounds, because we bring different experiences and skill sets into the crypto world. My background is in law and also as a hedge fund manager. I have co-managed a Frontiers Markets hedge fund for about 20 years. So my background in investing is really in equities.
And I have a computer science degree. I've been in the industry for about 5 years now. I've worked as everything from technical support to programmer, application developer, and now I'm a data analyst. So I bring the nerdier technical side to things.
And we're a little bit different age groups here as well. I'm in my 50s. Ross is in his 20s. So we've got the different points of view that comes with the different ages as well.
I know the hip young lingo.
That's right. All right. You can inform everybody of that. All right. So with our different backgrounds and skill sets, we hope that with combination of our knowledge bases, we can provide some useful information. This is our first show, so we have to start at the beginning with the foundation of crypto assets. So we're going to start, of course, with Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
Yep,
and then our next logical one to dive into is Ethereum, and we think, we'll tackle that on the next episode, but we think those are the two big players here that you can kind of build a good knowledge foundation around,
I think that's the foundation for all of our subsequent shows when we focus on other altcoins. So this is you got to start at the beginning, and the beginning is Bitcoin. So we got a lot of ground to cover here, Ross. So let's jump in, and just so that everyone knows, because of the time constraints and the volume of information relating to Bitcoin, we can't possibly cover all of the information. Everyone, it's out there on the internet and other sources. You can find out what you need to know. We're going to try to cover the important aspects to inform your investment decision. So let's jump into Bitcoin. Well, Ross, you want me to get started? I can get started with some background, and then you can jump in when we get to the more technical aspects.
Yeah, give us the history of wise, Brian.
Well, I'm going to give a brief history, but I will say the history of Bitcoin is truly fascinating. It started in about November of 2008 when a person named Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, describing a new digital currency. Satoshi Nakamoto was not his real name.
What?
But his true identity remains unknown, and that is truly one of the great mysteries of our time.
Yeah.
As you will see, or maybe you already know, Bitcoin is quite a phenomenon, and the fact that the inventor of it has remained anonymous is amazing to me. But anyway, so after he released his white paper in November of 2009, November 2008. In January 2009, the code was released, and the first Bitcoins were mined. So his digital currency, or his or their, they don't know if it's an individual or a group or what, but it was designed to correct some of the problems that there had been attempted digital currencies before. And his white paper explained the process and how he was going to address some of those problems. So let's talk about some of the features. First of all, one of the things that you'll always hear about Bitcoin and a lot of other crypto assets is decentralization. So what does that mean to you, Ross?
So, coming from like technical side of things, like, let's say you have an account at a bank and you need to verify, oh, I need to verify a transaction. I want to send my mom $100 for her birthday. Well, that bank is a centralized entity that's got to verify that transaction. So me, the consumer or the sender of birthday gifts to my mom, has got to rely on this bank to verify this transaction. I am reliant on this bank.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, and even going maybe a step beyond that, even in our money system, right? The U.S. dollars, we're based in the U.S. Same for every country that has its own currency. We're relying on a central bank to back up the money, the fiat money it's called, the U.S. dollars. They print more money whenever they want. They can change the interest rates.
Right.
So again, that's centralization that exists with fiat currency, which is just kind of paper and coin money. So one of the main features of Bitcoin, and that's really important, is that it's decentralized. And that just means there's no one government, no company, no person, no organization that controls it. It's done by the public, and anyone can participate.
Yeah, and for all your software developer guys out there, this is similar to like open source code, right? Like anyone can contribute to the project as long as you pass certain tests within the system,
And it really is open source because anyone, as we're going to see, anyone can download the software and participate in the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yep.
All right, so we mentioned the blockchain. We talked about decentralization. So how does that work? Well, that's where the blockchain comes in. And most people have heard of blockchain, and Bitcoin was really the first world application of a blockchain, and it's still going. We're still adding blocks to the chain every 10 minutes, as we'll hear. So the Bitcoin blockchain really is just a public ledger. A ledger like every entity has to keep track of its accounts and debits and credits. It's a public ledger. So that means that all of Bitcoin transactions are available to the public. Now encryption is used, so there's encryption keys that are used when someone sends or receives a transaction in Bitcoin. So you're not really using your name. They don't see that Ross sends something to Brian. They see an encrypted code, sends it to another encrypted code. But all these transactions are published on the blockchain, which is really thousands. The blockchain itself is thousands of copies of the same program. So all these different people have downloaded the program, and they're called nodes. So you got these thousands of nodes that are verifying and confirming the transactions. And that's why it's decentralized. It's not just one bank. So, for example, a hacker could target that bank and get everyone's information. That is not possible on the blockchain because it's all decentralized, and there's thousands of nodes that are operating it. So it's really they're members of what's the Bitcoin community, and anyone can be a member by downloading a software and participating in it. Anything you want to add to that, Ross?
Yeah. So, this is, I guess, the segue into the next thing is like, what is verifying these transactions? And this is called mining, and it's a lot of. Every time I bring this up to someone talking about crypto, it's like, so you're telling me I can just mine for coins and these coins appear out of nowhere? It's like, well, it's a little more than that, and maybe mining is just a bad name for it. I don't know. I don't really like the name of mining, but anyway, mining is just verifying the next transaction within the chain. And
let me just, before we get to the details of the mining, all right, I want to first.
I'm hyped up, man.
I know,
first
man.
episode.
That's right. I want to focus on the community participation, the nodes. I'm pretty fascinated by this. So the nodes, this community, they're the ones that are essentially affirming every proposed transaction. So it goes to all of these nodes, and if something doesn't match, so somebody, maybe an attempted fraudulent transaction, then it's just rejected. All the nodes will see it. Maybe the one or two, or if they combine and try to slip through a fraudulent transaction, all the others will see, no, that doesn't match with what we have on our node, and so it's just rejected, and that's called the consensus. Consensus. That's an important part of the Bitcoin system.
I know what that word means.
And as I said, they're added so new blocks are added every 10 minutes. And this, roughly, it's on average, it's every 10 minutes. So what is a block? So we got a block chain, right? So it's made up of blocks. What's a block? A block is just a bundle of transactions that have occurred in the past 10 minutes. So there's all these transactions going on. After approximately 10 minutes, you take all those transactions, as somebody's buying a couch from some online company that accepts Bitcoin, and that's one of the transactions. You get those. There's thousands of them. They're all bundled into this block. So that's part of what is in a block. The biggest part, really, is all these transactions. So also in a block, you get the new Bitcoins, and we're going to talk about how many of those there are for each block. But you add the new Bitcoins to the block so that whoever wins the block, which Ross is going to tell you about later in the mining, they get those Bitcoins. That's the reward. And then you also have the hash of the previous block. And then something else called a nonce. And that's a pretty cool word. Have you ever heard that word?
Nonce. It's fun to say, Brian. I'll tell you that.
It's fun to say. Nonce. And nonce is just a number that can be changed, okay? And then that's added to the block. So that's what we got. That's what makes up the block. You got these bundle of transactions. You got the new Bitcoin that's rewarded to the winning miner, which we'll talk about. You got the hash of the previous block, and then you have the nonce. So before we get on to let Ross talk about the winning miner, I think the hash and the nonce need a little explanation. So a hash is where the cryptography comes in. This is crypto assets, cryptocurrency. The crypto is cryptography. And
it's just not a fun word to say. It ties back to something. I like it.
So a hash is just a cryptographic process that's pretty interesting and fascinating, and you can play around with it. And we'll tell you about how to do that. A hash is just a process that takes almost any data input and creates a seemingly random output, which is just a string of numbers and letters. So for Bitcoin, they use SHA-256 protocol. And that really just explains the size, really, of the output number. It's all equal. So if your input could be anything, it could be the word, your name. It could be Brian. So if you put in Brian and you hash it, you get a 256 byte, I think, result, which is just a long string of letters and numbers. But every time you put in the same input, you get the same output. But if you change that input by anything, if I just put Brian in a period, totally changes the outcome, the hash. So this is where hashing is used. It's a really effective encryption. And you can see it for yourself. You can pull up any kind of website to see how it works. There's a lot of them out there. You can probably Google, SHA-256 hashing sample, and you can try, you can type in the Declaration of Independence, change one letter, and you get a completely different output. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and the name of the game here is just, it's so hard to figure out this encryption,
It's impossible. Essentially impossible.
Yeah.
So you can, so the fact that you get, then that every block includes the hash of the previous block. If you go in and you play with that and you kind of see how the hashes work, you'll see the significance of that. Because that means if there's any attempted changes to the prior blocks, boom, everybody knows it. Because you change, like I said, one period, one space, you get a completely different hash as a result. So if someone tries to tamper with any previous block, it's immediately apparent to everyone who runs a node.
Yeah, trying to get that randomly correct is just impossible.
It is impossible, and you would have to change every block back to the Genesis block, which was the first block back in 2009. Just literally impossible. So that's why, you can see the security of the system by looking at that fact. All right, so Ross, so at the end, so every block is created. You get all these transactions, and you add a reward of bitcoins, which we'll talk about the number of the reward in a minute. But who gets that? Who gets the reward, and how does that work? And this is when we get to mining. So let's talk about the winning miner.
Yeah, so, and maybe I'll take a step back for a second, because, to be a node in this system, let's talk about the costs associated with that. So to do all this cryptographic hashing, it's super expensive. I mean, you're talking like tons of energy consumed at your house. Let's say you're running your computer to verify these transactions. I mean, you're going to be just churning away. I mean, there's a lot of calculators out there that'll show you like, okay, if I'm going to mine this cryptocurrency, what's my kilowatt hour from the power company, to factor that in your total return on this. So, it's not just like, oh, let me have a game running on my computer, for example. I'm just going to spend a little bit of power and I'm going to get a ton of money back. No, it's not the case. You're going to spend tons of time churning away. So there's got to be incentive for you to even want to do this.
Well, and the incentive, at least right now, and again, we'll talk about this, is 12.5 Bitcoins. And, of course, the price of Bitcoin in U.S. dollars or whatever currency is constantly changing. But let's say if it were $10,000, just to make the calculation easy, right, at 12.5, you're getting $125,000.
Yeah.
So it's a nice reward.
So, it's pretty good.
All right. So, but you got to spend some money to get it, I guess, is what you're saying with the cost of the electricity.
Yeah. I mean, factor in electricity to running your high-powered machine, building a high-powered machine, to even doing it. I mean, to be a node is very expensive. And, not to go too far into it, but just to shed some light on it. Now, really, if you're going to, let's say, mine Bitcoin, you better be in a mining pool, which is basically a whole group of people powering their computers together to try and be one node. And then, they divvy out that 12 Bitcoin reward evenly throughout the system. So
I think back in the day, again, going back in the history, right, in the early days, you could probably run it from your desktop or your laptop and maybe have a shot at winning a reward.
Yep.
And then, as I understand it, it went to the GPUs. You had to get the graphic interface, which had more computing power, and you could win some doing that. And then now it's just gone to these huge facilities. As a practical matter, a person like us can't just get on and go and start mining and win a reward, correct?
Oh, yeah. It's pretty much impossible.
It is now.
For the average Joe now.
I've got, I saw I guess a statistic that showed the number of calculations that has to be done, per minute or whatever in order to solve the puzzles. Well, let's talk. We haven't really talked about that. So, the way to win a block and get to announce the block and then get the reward associated with that block is by being the first to solve a puzzle. And as I understand it, essentially that means finding a hash output that we talked about. So we mentioned that you have this nonce that's in every block, and that nonce is something you can vary. So essentially we have these programs, as I understand. You have these computer programs that run different, they vary that nonce and just try it. So you change the nonce and then you add the other information in the block, like we said, like all of the transactions, and you get the hash output of that, and it has to be a certain number, start with a certain number of zeros. It's just a level of difficulty, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that right? And so these programs change the nonce, and they're just doing it millions of times per second, I think.
Oh, yeah.
to find one that ends in the or that results in solving the puzzle, which is certain number of zeros in the hash result as the first numbers on the hash. So if you just do the hash, if you go to one of those hash programs and you put in different things, you'll see sometimes it'll start with a letter A, or sometimes it'll start with a number 7, but so it's almost random where you can find a certain number of zeros, and I think depending on the difficulty, it can be up to 6, 7, or 8 zeros that just happen to start a hash when you manipulate the nonce.
Yeah, and this is a good time, I would say, to bring up, people always talk about all these cryptocurrency, to keep this blockchain alive, people always talk about the energy consumption and how, I heard one thing, to power the Bitcoin network, it's using all the power that New Zealand uses.
Yeah, certain countries, yeah.
And you can see all these nodes are competing to write the next block. Right. So and we can get into maybe slight, not segue. I'm not segueing into it, but proof of work versus proof of stake, that's going to play a little role into it later on.
I think we'll get into that on later shows, right?
Oh, yeah.
But you mentioned it, so we should say this is called proof of work. The mining that's used by Bitcoin, where you have to essentially solve the puzzles to get the hash that meets the certain requirements, that's called proof of work. There's alternatives to that, but Bitcoin is set on proof of work, and essentially that's one of the criticisms is now that it uses so much energy, that it's not environmentally friendly, but that's sort of the way it is.
And you can see in this system, you have, I don't even know how many nodes are in it now, but tons of nodes. Thousands of nodes.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah. Trying to solve and get the next block. So you're essentially having all these machines running at once, competing for this next block.
It's a matter of, number one, hashing power. How much absolute power you have. How many of these sample random numbers you're running through per second.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And then the second part is just pure luck. There's sort of a lottery element to it. If you just get lucky to get the exact right nonce that meets the solution, then you can win it. And then by winning it, you then just publish it to all the other nodes, and they can very, very quickly run your number. You say, hey, I came up with this nonce that meets the requirements of the puzzle. They all run it real quick, and they're like, yep, you won. So they publish that. That then becomes part of the blockchain, and the winning miner, submits their code, and they get the winning Bitcoin. So that's sort of how that works.
And taking a step back, this is all to just publish this public ledger of transactions.
Right. And then then that becomes the next block, and then the hash of that block, which is all the information we talked about, is hashed. And that then becomes part of the next block. And so, again, that shows that is how every block sort of incorporates every bit of information from all the prior blocks. And any kind of meddling with the prior blocks is going to be known by everyone. So it's sort of the genius of the system in a way.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about the reward. So from 2009 until November of 2012, the reward was 50 Bitcoins. Nice.
Nowadays, yeah.
Back then, maybe not so many people battling for it, at least in the early years. So you got the winner, first one to solve the puzzle, got the 50 Bitcoins. In November of 2012, the first halving occurred, and that's like half, H-A-L-F, but it's a halving. It's called a halving, and the reward then was reduced from 50 Bitcoins to 25. So from November of 2012, for the next approximately 4 years after that, the reward was 25 Bitcoins. So the second halving, H-A-L-V, occurred in July of 2016. And that cut the reward from 25 bitcoins to 12.5 bitcoins, and that's what the current reward is. What's somewhat significant now, we're doing this in this first podcast in late 2019. The next halving will occur in May of 2020, and then the reward will be cut by half again to 6.25 bitcoins.
And of course, for like, I think the first thing when I heard about this, like, why would you even have, you know, why would you say, oh, now I only get 25 bitcoins for all these transactions? But you can see that as a way of, like, you know, validating this currency. If you keep dishing out 50 bitcoins, then it's never gonna gain more value, as I understand it.
Yes,
so.
And to me, this is getting on maybe the most important topic of Bitcoin value, and that is the supply.
Yep.
So Satoshi, in his white paper, limited the number of Bitcoins to approximately 21 million. I don't know if it's exactly, but it's approximately 21 million Bitcoins. So there is a limited supply, unlike U.S. dollars, unlike every other currency where the government can just print more. There is a limited supply that the Bitcoin community has, and I believe always will, enforce. So
this is built in. You know,
it is built in,
like,
and the Bitcoin community is extremely strict on this. You ain't going to be any more than 21 million.
Yeah.
So the question is then, for those of you listening, where are we now? So we are, 2009, we're basically 10 years, roughly 10 years into the Bitcoin existence and the new Bitcoins being issued. As of now, and we are late 2019, early 2020, there are approximately 18 million Bitcoins in circulation. 18 million out of 21 million are in circulation. That's over 85%.
And I would put the argument out there. I would say less than 18 million. Because, you hear all the time on the news about these guys like, oh, I had so many Bitcoins on this flash drive and I lost them.
Oh.
So, I would throw less than.
That's right.
You know?
No doubt. Early on, at least, when people weren't really sure where this was going, there were a lot of Bitcoins that were lost. And so, that makes really the supply even a little bit less than the actual number. But the point and the real takeaway from this is there is a limited supply.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, you can make an analogy to gold, right? To some other oil, I suppose, where there is a limited supply of it. What happens? It becomes scarce, and then what happens? The value goes up.
The supply is limited, and we know it. Oil, well...
You might discover some more.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to discover any more Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's done.
It's a 21 million is the total. And the point to focus on now, this halving, because of the nature of halving, I guess, is going to go on until, I believe, year 2140. But, toward the end, the last 100 years, there are going to be very, very few new Bitcoins being issued. And so what you're going to have then, is really, unlike all fiat currencies issued by governments where there's inflation, some level of inflation, almost always, with Bitcoin there's deflation. And the thing about that is that means the value goes up. There's less supply, so there's more demand for less supply, and in theory, then the value is going to go up. So that's, I guess, leads us to where I suppose our conclusions on what we think about Bitcoin. Where do you see Bitcoin going in the future, Ross?
One basic fact: if the supply is limited, it's got to go up. So I'm hoping my investment turns out.
Yeah. And maybe we ought to both say we do own some Bitcoin, and as full disclosure, we own Bitcoin.
we are staked in this. So, but I think there's a lot of issues that got to be solved, right? Like with the money in my pocket, you can almost plot it on a chart. If it flies away in the wind, it's gone. the Bitcoin in a digital wallet, I mean, is saved. There's security and it's backed, But I think it's just got to be, for me to see it as a currency, there's got to be ways for it to be, the security's there. But I think ease of use has got to get to me. That's where I see it really being the tipping point of becoming a currency.
I'm going to pipe in here with my thought that is, I don't really see Bitcoin becoming a currency replacement. I think just build into it with the 10-minute increments. It'll be used. I think it can and will be even more used as a currency on bigger transactions. But I don't see it as ever being a currency they're going to use to go in a convenience store and buy, a beer and a beef jerky. But that doesn't mean, and so then we'll get into some of the altcoins that attempt to address that on later shows.
That and other things, yeah.
Yes, but what I see with Bitcoin is it becoming a store of value, and you've seen this a little bit in countries where they've had issues with their currency, like in Venezuela, some countries like that, when their currency just becomes almost useless or inflation is so high that it's losing value constantly. You see a big jump in use of Bitcoin in those countries. And I think a similar thing can happen in more developed countries like the U.S. and Europe and Canada and places like that, where even in a recession type environment, when investors start looking for safe harbors and they've traditionally gone to gold, I can see Bitcoin being a replacement for that. So a store of value where someone will just buy it knowing that because of the limited supply, its value is likely to go up, that could be a big impetus for its value.
Oh, that's a good thought. I have actually never thought of it that way. That's pretty cool. Because I mean, in the U.S., the dollar's so solid that maybe that's why we don't see as much usage.
The dollar's solid. Well, that's true. But we're overdue for a recession. I haven't had one in 10 years, which is almost unheard of. So when the recession comes, what do people do? They look, where do I put my money where I can get some value out of it? And if it's not going to be in stocks, and bonds are going to be questionable, which they have been lately, where do you go? And I just think Bitcoin will be a possible venue for people to park their money. And when they do, demand just goes up, and then, of course, price goes up. It kind of brings up a funny aspect of the whole Bitcoin community. There became a term created out of this when Bitcoin had its last big drop. So in 2017, price went through the roof, got up to 20,000.
Oh, that was a great summer. Yeah,
which was nutty.
That's when you got into it, wasn't it?
No, unfortunately, no. But in 2018, then it saw a big plunge. But some on some public forum, someone had a typo where they said they meant to say I'm holding my Bitcoin through the big downturn in 2018, but they said hodling. They misspelled it, H-O-D-L. I'm hodling. So now you got the term in the Bitcoin for people who just buy and hold, which is, I put myself in that camp. We're now hodlers. And so instead of holders, we're hodlers.
Hodl.
So, yeah, I am hodling Bitcoin, and will do so certainly until I see the effects of the halving in 2020, and the effects of the halving have been traditionally in the past two times where there's been a halving have been delayed. So I plan on holding mine for at least 6 months, maybe 12 months after the halving to see what happens, and then of course that'll depend on what happens with the price. What's your strategy on that?
Well, I kind of. Maybe I'm going in your world. I'm kind of dipping into your world with this a little bit. But I always like the Warren Buffett thing. If it dips, buy more. I mean, you're getting a discount. So I don't know. Hold, and just like you've said, there's with this halving, I mean, it almost seems clear that the value is going to go up. I mean, if you're limiting the rate at which the supply is given out,
Yep.
I mean, it's got to go up. That seems pretty basic to me. So
You would think so. You never know with all this. But you never know.
Yep.
This just brings me, I know we're running out of time, but the story that I always think of on this is the first, what's the least published or, people talk about as being one of the first Bitcoin transaction is the guy who bought 2 pizzas. And I believe he spent something like 100 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. And you think of that guy. I mean, now, looking back, if he'd held on to those, at one point, I don't know, 100 times 20,000.
Oh yeah, at the height, yeah.
I mean, a couple million, or even if you just held on to them now, it's half of that still a ton of money that he ate in pizzas. But
there's even a guy I worked with that started mining. I mean, this was like 2012, 2013. I thought he was crazy, to be honest with you, when he was telling me about it. Oh man, I mine these Bitcoins. Like, man, I don't know what you're doing.
So he was winning some.
Oh yeah, I mean, this was back then, and maybe it wasn't Bitcoin, maybe it was something else. But I mean, him and his friends were just buying, mountain bike parts. So he had a sweet mountain bike, but I know he'd rather something else.
But now you're looking back, you probably spent $2 million on that mountain bike.
Yep.
All right. Well, Ross, I think we might need to wrap up our first episode here. Yep. That is Bitcoin, and to our listeners, I will be telling you we will be referring back to Bitcoin constantly because it is the leader. It is the...
I was going to say Mac Daddy, but yeah.
It is the original cryptocurrency, and every subsequent cryptocurrency has Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto to thank for its existence. So we'll be referring back to that, but I think hopefully that gives everyone a good general overview of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a good foundation, Brian.
All right, and everybody remember, we are
the Crypto Masters.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks.